The cold titanium of the tablet felt heavy in Elias's calloused hand. He had found it half submerged in a shallow puddle at the bottom of Dry Dock 4. He wiped the screen against his canvas jacket. The display flared to life, bypassing the passcode prompt for a split second to reveal the lock screen. Elias stopped breathing. Staring back at him was a photograph of a 22-year-old boy holding the tiller of a wooden skiff. It was him, but the photo had been cropped, intentionally cutting out the girl who had been sitting right beside him. Before he could process the image, a low, rhythmic vibration shuddered through the concrete floor. High above him sat the Sovereign, an $800 million autonomous passenger vessel, scheduled for its maiden launch at dawn. The central AI system's green lights pulsed, signaling absolute structural perfection. But Elias didn't need an algorithm to tell him the ship was bleeding pressure. If you are a father who would risk everything to protect the truth, type "I choose the truth" in the comments below. Elias was 42, an independent deep-sea hull inspector who had built his life on a simple rule: you do what you say you are going to do. It was a mindset that made him a fast learner and completely unafraid of failure, traits he leaned on heavily as a single father. When life knocked him down, he didn't complain. He just found a new way to build stability and wealth for his family. He needed the final payout from this inspection contract to cover the specialized corneal surgery for his daughter, Lily. Lily had been blind since birth, and Elias had spent the last 8 years teaching her how to see the world through sound and vibration. That same hypersensitivity to sound was why he was currently standing under the massive hull of the Sovereign, ignoring the mocking whispers of the corporate engineers above. They wore custom suits and relied on million-dollar laser scanners. Elias wore a faded diving sweater and carried a brass-sounding hammer and a mechanic's stethoscope. He was tracing a phantom echo near propeller shaft 3 when the heavy blast doors of the dry dock opened. Evelyn Vance walked in. She was the CEO of Vance Maritime, the most powerful woman in the global shipping industry, and the owner of the missing tablet. She was also the girl who had been cropped out of that photograph. 20 years had passed since their abrupt separation. They hadn't spoken since the day Elias received a typed, cold letter, telling him he was nothing but a summer mistake. He didn't know that Evelyn had received an identical letter with his forged signature. Evelyn stopped when she saw him standing by the scaffolding. The air between them turned to ice. She held out her hand, and Elias placed the titanium tablet into her palm without a word. She looked down, saw the illuminated screen, and her breath hitched. She knew he had seen it, but there was no time for the past. Nolan, the company's chief operating officer, stepped out from behind Evelyn with a smug, practiced smile. He announced that the engineering team had signed off on the final safety protocols. The launch was officially cleared. Elias shook his head, his voice quiet but absolute. He told them the ship wasn't going anywhere. Nolan laughed, a sharp, condescending sound that echoed off the hull. He asked why a guy who banged on metal for a living thought he could overrule a quantum diagnostic system. Elias didn't argue, because arguing was a waste of breath when you had the facts. He walked straight past the security detail and into the mobile control room. Nolan yelled for the guards to drag him out. Elias grabbed a half-full glass of water from a technician's desk. He walked over to the exposed section of the steel drive shaft housing and set the glass down flat. The room went dead silent. At first, nothing happened. Then, the surface of the water began to tremble. It wasn't a random ripple. The water formed distinct, diagonal waves, vibrating in a violent, asymmetrical pattern. It was the undeniable physical proof of a microfracture deep inside the core structure, a flaw the AI had been deliberately blinded to. If you stand with a man who refuses to back down against the corporate machine, type "I choose the truth" in the comments right now. Evelyn stared at the rippling water, the color draining from her face. She didn't look at her engineers. She looked directly at Elias. For the first time in 2 decades, the walls she had built around herself cracked. She ordered the launch suspended immediately. Nolan's face twisted in rage as he realized his multi-million-dollar sabotage was unraveling because of a glass of water. He stepped forward, threatening to ruin Elias's career and ensure he never worked on a shipyard again. Elias didn't flinch. He just looked Nolan in the eye and told him to go ahead and try. That night, the shipyard was placed on lockdown. Elias was packing up his gear when a shadow fell across his workbench. Evelyn stood there, holding the titanium tablet. She didn't speak to him like a CEO addressing a contractor. She spoke to him like the girl who used to sit beside him on the wooden skiff. She asked for his help. Using the tablet, they bypassed Nolan's restricted access and pulled up the raw system logs. Elias's fast-learning mind easily identified the discrepancies in the procurement data. A cheap, uncertified structural bearing had been installed on shaft 3. Tracing the supplier ID, the shell company led straight back to a hidden offshore account, an account owned by Nolan. Nolan was intentionally trying to cripple the Sovereign on its maiden voyage, to tank the company's stock for a hostile takeover. But that wasn't the only thing they found hidden in Nolan's files. Deep in the archived folders was a scanned document from 20 years ago. It was a handwritten draft of a breakup letter. Elias recognized the handwriting instantly. It wasn't Evelyn's. It was Nolan's. He had forged the letters that tore them apart. Evelyn stared at the signature on the screen. For 20 years, she had carried a quiet, heavy anger toward the man standing next to her. Now she realized that her entire adult life had been manipulated by the executive she trusted most. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She just looked at Elias, and they silently agreed on exactly what needed to happen next. The following morning, the Sovereign's launch pavilion was packed with global investors and the maritime press. Nolan stood at the podium, smiling for the cameras, ready to initiate the launch sequence. He knew the ship would fail in the water, tanking the stock price just in time for his shell company to buy the panic-sold shares. Before his hand could touch the ceremonial launch button, the double doors at the back of the room swung open. Evelyn walked down the center aisle. Elias was right behind her, carrying a heavy, oil-stained canvas duffel bag over his shoulder. Nolan gripped the edge of the podium, his smile faltering as he ordered port security to remove the unauthorized diver. The guards stepped forward, but Evelyn raised her hand, freezing them in place. She commanded the room with absolute authority. Elias walked straight up to the mahogany presentation table. He unzipped the canvas bag and pulled out a massive, fractured steel bearing housing. He dropped it onto the table. The heavy metal cracked the expensive wood with a deafening thud. Gasps echoed through the pavilion. Elias looked directly at the investors. He explained that he had spent the night pulling that counterfeit Class 3 bearing directly out of Shaft 3. He told them it was designed to shear under the immense torque of open ocean waves. It wasn't an accident. It was a delayed death sentence for the ship. Nolan's face turned bright red as he pointed a shaking finger at Elias. He screamed that the diver had planted the part to extort the company. He called Elias a desperate, broke loser who was trying to ruin their historic day. But Evelyn didn't argue with him. She simply tapped a button on her tablet. The massive presentation screen behind Nolan flickered. Instead of a promotional video, the screen displayed Nolan's decrypted offshore bank records. It showed the exact wire transfers to the counterfeit parts manufacturer. It showed the short positions he had secretly taken against Vance Maritime stock just 2 days ago. The room erupted into total chaos. If you believe that corrupt people always expose themselves in the end, type, "I choose the truth," in the comments right now. Port Authority police stepped into the pavilion, their radios crackling. Nolan's arrogant smirk completely vanished as they placed him in handcuffs and walked him out past the flashing cameras. The ship was saved, and Evelyn retained full control of her company. 3 days later, she met Elias at a quiet diner near the industrial docks. She slid a formal contract across the table. It was an offer to become the global director of quality control for Vance Maritime. It came with a 7-figure salary and a corner office in the city. Elias looked at the number. It was enough money to never worry about Lily's medical bills again. Then, he slid the paper back across the table. Evelyn looked confused, asking him why he would walk away from financial security. Elias took a sip of his black coffee. He told her he didn't want to be an employee, and he definitely didn't want a job that felt like an apology. He explained that he was taking a small business loan to start his own independent inspection firm. He wanted the freedom to work on his own terms, so he could still be there when his daughter came home from school. He smiled and asked if Vance Maritime was looking for a reliable, independent contractor. Evelyn stared at him for a long moment, realizing that the boy she loved had grown into a man she deeply respected. She smiled back, a real, unguarded smile, and agreed to be his first client. A month later, Elias was sitting on the edge of his small, weathered wooden dock. His daughter, Lily, was sitting next to him, her feet dangling above the water as she listened to the seagulls. Footsteps approached slowly on the wooden planks. Elias turned to see Evelyn walking toward them. She wasn't wearing a designer suit or carrying a briefcase. She wore a simple sweater and a pair of worn-out sneakers. She sat down right next to them on the edge of the dock. Lily reached out, and Evelyn gently held the little girl's hand. Evelyn pulled out her titanium tablet to check the incoming tide schedule. The screen lit up. The old, cropped photo of the teenage boy was gone. In its place was a new picture, taken just a few days ago. It showed Elias, Evelyn, and Lily, all three of them laughing together in the afternoon sun. Some things are broken by a lie, but the strongest foundations are always rebuilt with the truth. If you stand with Elias, type "I choose the truth" one last time, and hit that subscribe button to join our community of good fathers.